So, what if I told you there's a letter, nearly 2,000 years old, that might as well have been written about the messes we see today? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack here. This ancient message to a city that was frankly a total train wreck, and what it has to say about our own modern world. Okay, so before we even dive into the letter itself, you really have to get a picture of the city it was sent to. And I mean, forget any image you have of some dusty, sleepy ancient town. No way. First century Corinth was basically the it city. It was a massive international hub. Think of it as the New York or London of its time. It was a crossroads for everything: trade, culture, ideas, just buzzing with this incredible energy, diversity, and, yeah, temptation at every single turn. And look, Corinth wasn't just some busy port city. It was a total cultural powerhouse. It was wealthy, it hosted the famous Isthmian Games, kind of like their Olympics, and it was a huge center for philosophy. But it also had a reputation, a big one. In fact, it was so famous for its moral corruption that people actually invented a new word for it. To Corinthianize literally became slang for living a grossly immoral life. And a huge part of that reputation came from the main temple to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, which, get this, reportedly had 1,000 religious prostitutes. So yeah, this is the world this brand new community was trying to survive in. So you can imagine, right? Right in the middle of this wild, bustling city, a tiny, new Christian community is trying to get started. But, well, let's just say it wasn't going well. They weren't just struggling, they were in a full-blown crisis. It was a mess. So the founder of this church, the Apostle Paul, gets wind of what's happening. He gets what the sources call a disturbing report from a member of the community named Chloe. And the list of problems, wow, it was just staggering. We're talking deep divisions, where the church was basically splitting into fan clubs for different leaders. Then there were the disorders. I mean, they were tolerating serious sexual immorality, even suing each other in public court. It gets worse. Even their core beliefs were up for debate, with some of them starting to deny the resurrection itself. It was chaos. You know, this quote from a scholar really just sums it all up perfectly. The church was in the world as it had to be, but the world was in the church as it ought not to be. And that's the key, right? The issue wasn't that they existed in Corinth. It's that Corinth, with all its values, was starting to exist in them, just eating away at their community from the inside. But listen, all of those things, the divisions, the lawsuits, the moral problems, those were just the symptoms. To really figure out what was going on, you have to go deeper. What was the actual root of the problem? What was the underlying disease that was making this community so sick? Well, it seems the root of the problem was something they called worldly wisdom. Basically, the Corinthians were still completely hooked on their old culture's value system. And in their world, what was wise? It was all about celebrity status, especially for these super impressive public speakers. It was about social power, prestige, eloquence, and this really competitive, self-promotional mindset. So here's what was happening. They were taking this new faith and trying to cram it into the mold of their old culture. They were looking at their spiritual leaders and treating them like celebrity philosophers, picking favorites and competing for status. And this clash, this pride they brought in from the outside world, that was the real source of all their problems. The divisions, the moral failures, all of it. So what's Paul's solution to all this? You might think he'd send them a new list of rules, right? But nope, he does something way more radical. He introduces them to a completely different kind of wisdom, one that was going to turn their entire world upside down. And I mean, just look at the contrast here. It's night and day. On the one hand, you've got the world's wisdom, which is all about power, status, eloquence, pride, success. That's what they knew. But then Paul brings in the wisdom of the cross. And what does that look like? Weakness, service, humility, sacrifice. Its biggest symbol wasn't a powerful king, but a crucified Messiah. To the Corinthian mind, that wasn't just weak, it was complete and utter foolishness. And this is why Paul says he decided to know nothing among them except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. He boils his entire message down to this one central, shocking idea. He's intentionally picking the one thing that is a direct assault on everything they valued. This wasn't just some theological point, it was a head-on collision with their culture. Okay, so that's the big idea, the wisdom of the cross. But how did it actually work, like as a practical solution to their very real problems? Let's take a look. All right, let's take their number one problem, the divisions. Remember how they were splitting into these fan clubs, boasting about following Paul or Apollos or Peter? The problem was pride in human leaders. So, the cure? Paul applies the wisdom of the cross. He reminds them that God's whole strategy is to choose the weak and foolish things of the world to shame the strong. So what does that leave room for? Absolutely no boasting in human leaders. If you're going to boast, you boast in the Lord. See how it completely reframes the whole issue? So that all happened a long, long time ago. Why does any of this still matter today? Well, because the central problem in this letter, it's completely timeless. You know, there's a commentator, James Boyer, who put it this way. He said if Paul were to write a letter to the churches in modern America, it would probably look a whole lot like 1 Corinthians. Think about it. That same pressure to value celebrity, that same pull toward lax moral standards, that same fascination with what's spectacular, it's all still here. The temptation for a community to just become a mirror of the culture around it is as real as it ever was. And that really gets to the core challenge, doesn't it? This ancient letter asks a question that every community, whether it's religious or not, has to wrestle with. When you are surrounded, day in and day out, by a powerful culture that is just screaming at you that status, success, and looking out for number one are all that matter, how on earth do you build a community that's based on something completely different? So in the end, the challenge of 1 Corinthians isn't really about ancient history. It's a question for right here, right now, for you, for me. In a world that is constantly pushing us to chase success and status, what does it actually mean to live by a different kind of wisdom? That's a question we're thinking about.